Hi, today I'm going to be talking about Dillingham, Alaska, and doing an environmental case study. So I'll be assessing all different kinds of threats that pertain to the environment around Dillingham, and I'm going to try and get through this, keep it under 15 minutes. So Dillingham is located on the Nushagak Bay. It's a part of Bristol Bay, so a lot of the things that go on in Bristol Bay, like the salmon fishing, affects Dillingham, even though it's not within its official jurisdiction. It's also surrounded by the Wood-Tikchik State Park. There's 1.6 million acres of that, so that's also relevant. As of 2016, there were estimated to be a little over 2,300 people. However, COVID could have affected that. I'm not really sure. The economy is largely centered around salmon fishing and processing. There's two fishing and processing companies within Dillingham itself, as well as many surrounding the area. Tourism is also big in the summer. And then for year-round employment, there's a lot of people working in healthcare and social assistance, as well as for the government, especially through the school district. And then subsistence and retail trade are relevant, as well as trapping. The main employers in the area are the Bristol Bay Area Health Corporation and the Bristol Bay Native Association, both employing around 250 people, as well as the Dillingham City School District, which employs another 100. In the area, the important points of infrastructure that could be threatened are the 15 fish processors southeast of Dillingham. Two of those are in the community, the Peter Pan Seafoods and Icicle Seafoods. There's also a refuse plant. There's a diesel-generated electric plant. The phone provider is GCI. There are two public schools and one private school. More information is obtainable on the public schools, but the private is also important to consider. And then there's a number of larger health centers in the area, the hospital, the health center, and a mental health center. Subsistence is a big part of Dillingham life, especially fishing, but any kind of environmental impact that affects these populations, salmon, grayling, pike, moose, bear, caribou, those would really impact the people of Dillingham, as well as if something were to happen to, the berry harvest that year. So some threats and hazards that are mostly natural caused, though they could also have human impacts that would make them worse or to help mitigate some of the effects, would be erosion. And a lot of these also feed into each other, so if one occurs, it makes another one worse. Erosion, earthquakes, floods, there's heavy fogs in the area, ground failure, which covers a lot of different things, high winds, wildfires, also urban fires, river ice, and then volcanic ash and severe weather. And I'll go into more detail on some of these. Some more human-centered ones that could also make natural ones worse would be if there were a healthcare crisis. COVID-19 is a perfect example. Lack of transport, as you know, Dillingham is only accessible by water and by air, as well as an urban fire if there were to be pollution affecting the aquifer or an extended power outage. So some of these hazards I'm going to go into more detail, but I really don't have enough time to go in as much detail as I'd like to. The earthquake could happen. There isn't a whole lot of historical large-scale events, but there's many, many faults and seismic zones that are right around or right next to Dillingham. And this could cause things like pipeline spills, building damage or collapse, just any kind of critical infrastructure that the people rely on could be damaged by an earthquake in a very costly way. Floods could happen for any number of reasons. Ice jam flooding, especially during ice season, coastal storm surge, anything, unusual with Bristol Bay would affect Dillingham, as well as increasing levels of snowmelt and rainfall runoff. Especially snowmelt and sea level rise in relation to climate change is making the threat of flooding even worse. And this could cause things like structure inundation, impact damage, further worsen erosion, if there were, septic tanks or toxic materials being held in tanks and then it flooded, those tanks could spill out, releasing hazardous materials into the community and also cause a lot of economic loss. And they have taken some steps to insure against flood really well in Dillingham, so we'll look at those in a minute. Erosion or scour is a big issue in the area, especially located on the Wood River. There's a lot of areas that are being eaten away at the coast due to the loss of sediments. So as the river washes away sediments and there's flooding, there's less to keep that ground intact, and it's really hard to build any kind of marine infrastructure there. So things like the lack of sediments, the sea level rise, subsidence activities, building structures on the shore like dams kind of eats away at the natural protections against erosion, like a tree line. So there's that. And then this could cause really no immediate life safety concerns, but things like land loss and infrastructure damage really do add up over time. Ground failure covers a lot of things like avalanche, soil movement, subsidence, landslides, permafrost melting and changing the ground integrity. So that's really important here. They're actually located on lowlands, but there's some slope instability that could affect local buildings, and they're isolated masses of permafrost. So as they melt, that's going to change what the topography looks like. This could damage roads and infrastructure as well as change the stream levels. So when the river is higher or lower than usual, even if precipitation doesn't change, that could be due to shifts in the ground. Severe weather is really driven by a lot of climate change factors as well as the 10-year cycle of El Nino La Nina Southern Oscillation. So this it grows and then wanes over the course of 10 years, but it repeats. So this just leads to extreme things, extreme storms, ice storms, heavy rain, hail, lightning, thunderstorms, all that kind of thing. And as well as that 10-year cycle, other longer term drivers would be warming temperatures and loss of sea ice. This could affect the population if there were to be emergencies regarding the health of people, if there were more traffic incidents due to hailstorms, as well as fires due to thunderstorms and lightning. It could damage infrastructure. Moving on to fire, this could be natural or urban. Usually urban ones are caused by camp or cooking fires gone wrong or by children. Natural ones could be lightning. And there really isn't a whole lot of small scale long term drivers. Most of them are things like climate change on that macro scale. One very small aspect of that would be spruce bark beetles. As the temperature warms, they eat out more trees, killing them and providing combustible materials for fires to spread. This could cause property loss and environmental damage. It could cause deaths, but usually the response time is pretty short in Dillingham, so there isn't a huge concern for immediate deaths due to fires, although that is a possibility. Hazardous material incidents could be likely, especially due to flooding. There's 8 licensed hazardous waste handlers in Dillingham that are regulated. And as community trends change, as in regards to fuel use or processing techniques, then the level of threat could change. It could cause contamination of water. It could shut down, if there was an incident at the airport with fuel, then that could shut down air travel for a time being, as well as cause environmental damage to the area. And any kind of disruption in the distribution of services like utilities, electricity, fuel, that kind of thing could cause economic loss as well as injury in some cases or other health crises. So the other threats and hazards I didn't really go over, especially because I'm running out of time here. There's heavy fog in July and August. There's high winds during the typhoon season, which can make things like flooding worse. River ice is not present year-round, but from November to May it can be a concern and again, make flooding worse or cause more fishing incidents. During the summer, there's an almost doubled population due to the local economy changing. So if there were something like COVID, then that could tax the local healthcare system. So for example, right now, they actually were asking the governor of Alaska to shut down the Bristol Bay fishery because if something were to happen with COVID, people getting sick there, Dillingham's small healthcare system and small structures would not necessarily be able to handle that much. Other things like being isolated in the middle of other incidents, as it's not accessible by land to most towns, could cause issues, especially when regarding health emergencies. Some preventative or mitigative strategies that are already in place. They did some infrastructure repairs in the last few years, and they're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to assess erosion issues and map where that's occurring a little bit better. They repaved a lot of the roads to increase culvert size to increase drainage so that there wouldn't be as much damage done from flooding. And they've been doing regular community alert tests to make sure that everyone's on the same page in an emergency. They're also a participant in FEMA's flood insurance plan, and so that makes them eligible for grant opportunities that can further mitigate the effects of flooding on the community. They're also the seat of the Regional Community Development Quota Group, so they hand out permits to people from the area, telling them what they can and can't fish for and how much. And they've also built a lot of timber plank and pile bulkheads in the river and stuff to stop erosion so that they don't lose more shoreline and their ground is not as threatened. And they recently extended the seawall towards the Peter Pan dock where they do the fishing and processing. Things for the future that are either in the process or need to be addressed soon and have high priority for the community are finding new funding opportunities. So they have a lot of ideas, but not necessarily ways to fund them currently. Public education, especially on partaking in flood insurance and how that can benefit the individual residents of Dillingham and protect them from economic loss. Promoting fire-wise construction, which is, I don't really have time to go into the details, but it helps mitigate the damage of fires and make sure that things are up to code. Again, I mentioned they requested to close the fishery in the name of public interest concern or public health concerns, and they'd like to install and purchase more underground water tanks. Increasing incentives, pay, resources for emergency response personnel jobs in the area, as well as updating their building codes and assessing new requests to build in flooding and erosion prone areas, as well as creating more fire breaks around where that tree line is. So if there were something to go wrong with the park, then it wouldn't affect Dillingham as much. And clearing more of that dead wood near residents so that this spruce bark beetle kills, there needs to be more of a public effort to remove that. And while there have been a lot of infrastructure repairs done lately, there's certainly still more to go. I took most of this information directly from their 2016 hazard mitigation plan. I also used a map and a few other resources to look up things about Dillingham, but this was a very informative project that I enjoyed doing, and thank you for listening.